All right, welcome to our final session of our virtual spring summit. Thank you to our sponsors, Visit Lauderdale, Miles Partnership, Visit Greater Palm Springs, and LA Tourism. For those who've just joined us, we would love to have you be on video because I don't like the webinar format. I like it when we can see people and we can all talk. And look at that. I see some people I know who are going to be talking soon. If at any point there are things that you don't want recorded, write them in chat, send me a message, tell us, hey, I want to say this, but please pause or stop recording, and we will do so. And this is the last session, so hopefully you can stick around. But if you do need to pop off and away for a bit, come back. We'll miss you. Um, we are close to our goal. For those who haven't donated or done the suggested donation, please consider it. We are a 501c3, and your donations help us do our work. So if you've enjoyed this content, we'd appreciate you considering supporting. And then there's other ways to support. We have both individual and organizational membership, and I'll talk about this again in a second. Well, not a second, the end of the session. So I'm very excited for this group. I truly have no idea where this session's going to go, except for that we planned it and have questions and all that. But I trust each and every one of these people to potentially bring us in a very interesting and exciting direction. So thank you to Pauline Frommer, Ed Salvato, and Ernest White II for being here. I think we should just start off generally with introductions, even though there is a lot of cross-section of people who each of you. Pauline, do you want to say a bit about who you are and why you're choosing to take your time today for talking about this topic of turbulent times?
Sure. I'm Pauline Frommer. I'm the president of Frommer Media LLC, which is the publisher of the Frommer Travel Guides. Over the years, we've sold over 75 million guidebooks. We also were one of the very first websites on the web. Frommers.com existed before Expedia, before Google, before a lot of other sites. Depends on the month, depends what the Google algorithms are doing, but in recent months we've gotten 4 million unique users. And I am a podcast host. I used to be a radio host for 20 years. Our podcast was named one of the 13 best for travel by the New York Times. I'm the author of Frommer's New York City and Frommer's New York City Day by Day. I'm also the editorial director for all of the Frommer guidebooks. And I wanted to talk about how what is happening in the news is affecting the travel industry because I think that there is potential power in travel unity. I think that we, as important actors in not only the travel industry, but the economy, because by some estimates, 1 out of every 10 human beings on Earth works in the travel industry. So we're an important industry. And I'm hoping that as things get, I think, shakier and shakier for our industry, maybe it encourages more of us to become politically active because I think now is the time uh, to not only be business leaders, but to make our voices heard in the realm of politics because it's definitely affecting our industry.
Well, you
I
set
hope that didn't go too far over the line, but there
No,
you
that was perfect. I think you set the tone very nicely. I know him as Ed, but apparently he's Professor Edward Salvato to a lot of people I know now. So,
Yeah.
Professor, would you like to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah, I even grew my beard a little longer so you could get the gray professorial look going on here. But yeah, no, thank you, Ronnie, for inviting me to this awesome conversation with your amazing membership. What Travel Unity does is super important. I'm going to just echo what Pauline said. We have a voice, we have power. You may think we're powerless, but we're not. And we have a very important industry. So that's really what drew me here, as well as working with you, Ronnie, or you, Pauline, and getting to meet Ernest. And my name is Ed Salvato, or Ed to friends. You're all friends now. Ed Salvato. My day job is I'm a professor of tourism on the faculty of NYU. I teach tourism and hospitality to undergraduates and graduate students. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today, I'm already talking about in class. I'm also hearing from them in real time. Things like, this latest discussion about the visa from students specifically from China, right? So we have a lot of Chinese students. So this is real time kind of stuff. But I also have a small solo practice consultancy, and I help brands, travel brands, destinations, hotel, hospitality brands, authentically engage with LGBTQ travelers. That's kind of been my bread and butter for 25 years. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Professor. Ernest, do we get to know where you are in the world this second?
Hi, everyone. I am currently in the office in my apartment. But I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Originally from Jacksonville, Florida, USA. I am the producer and host of television travel docuseries Fly Brother with Ernest White II. It's out on PBS going into our fourth season. In every episode, I visit friends who bring me into their communities, show me what they love about the place, and we show the audience the whole world is our tribe. I am very, again, honored, privileged, and pleasured to be here. Ronnie has been for many, many years that I've known him kind of a leading light in creating the world that we want to live in and being very active in bringing people together and creating community across background and boundary. So happy to lend my voice where it's needed.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for the kind words. Let's start off slow because I think we're going to speed up in terms of there have been hints as to where we're going with this conversation, but let's start easier. So the question is, what do you think the travel industry should be considering as we're post-pandemic, endemic, and there's a lot other terms that people might use. But anyway, post-pandemic and potential economic downturn was how we phrased the question when we wrote this a few weeks ago. Yeah, I don't know. Even U.S. travel, as of yesterday or today, put a thing up that the travel industry is going to be losing what 5% of its money, its power, it's all of that this year. So the potential economic downturn, certainly for travel, there's a downturn. Starting with Pauline, where what do you think the travel industry should be considering? Because I think you started with this kind of context of the travel industry overall.
Yeah, I mean, the Frommer Guides were founded by my dad, Arthur, when he was a penniless GI. He was drafted into the army during the Korean War, and his uh, entree into the industry was how do you travel cheaply and well? And I think that there's often been a focus in the travel industry on high-end travel. Because that's the glamorous travel, that's what the celebrities do, that's the aspirational travel. But with a possible recession looming, I think we need to go back to looking at value. DMOs who are putting a lot of who may be getting the most money from, say, the Ritz-Carltons and the Mandarin Orientals may want to shift their focus, even with those sponsors, to looking at how they can bring in travelers of more limited means. And because of the way the stock market has been jumping up and down recently, whether or not people are limited means, I think a lot of people are feeling like they are of limited means right now because they just don't know where their portfolio is doing. And there's a record number of Americans now who are invested in the stock market. I think we have to, as an industry, get out of the mind space that luxury travel is the be all and end all and really start focusing more on value travel. Because what the pandemic taught us is we don't want to be stuck at home. I mean, that's why there was a surge of travel. And that's why I think even with a recession potentially coming, I still think people will get out there and travel because the lesson we all learned during the pandemic is life is short. and you want to get out there and experience the world. There's nothing like experiences. It's, yeah, as they say about travel, it's the only thing you buy that makes you richer. But with that value, look at it all. I think that will be appreciated by travelers. I think that will prod more travelers to hit the road when they can feel like they are doing it in a maybe not a cost, well, maybe a cost conscious way, either a cost conscious way or a way that they know that they're using their funds wisely.
Thanks, Pauline. I'm going to go to Ernest next. And, bridging off of this, as somebody who's on the road a good deal, as far as I could tell, have you been seeing rumblings? Are there things that you see changing within the spaces you're going in terms of this context of where we're at now and what the travel industry should be thinking about?
That's a good and hard question, Ronnie, especially following Pauline. But I would like to say, just to piggyback on what you said, limited means now does not mean always limited means, right? Many of us started off not having luxury experiences in terms of our accommodation or our class of travel, but we had luxury experiences in terms of the connections that we made, in terms of the memories that we've created. Some of my most impactful experiences were when like an example, eating canned tuna in France in front of the Eiffel Tower, but it was French canned tuna. So it had some kind of like tomato sauce in it that I had purchased with a bag of baguettes from Ed. So I think, if we can kind of maybe lean back into the value of that beginnership or that starter travel, or however we want to brand it. We're really good at branding. I think I do agree that that's a great way to kind of continue with this overall trajectory, that we are out in the world, that we are connecting more and more, despite temporary setbacks. In my travels recently, I haven't necessarily noticed that people are traveling any less. I haven't noticed that there's been an impact on people's desire. I know that people may have to be, figuring things out differently, but I think if we again, create an energetic space where people feel like they don't have to be traveling on that luxury level to still have a meaningful, transformational, impactful experience, they will continue to do it. We'll continue to have an industry that is sustainable and scalable.
Thanks, Ernest. Ed, and feel free to also delve into an LGBTQ plus lens if you want to take that angle too.
I can't help myself.
It's our next question
I'm
anyway. So that was
to
my
do that.
seamless
Oh, it is. I'm sorry.
transition.
Oh, it's a good segue. It's a good segue.
Yeah.
Anyway, like Ernest and Pauline are right on. Value is super important, and the luxury stuff we were getting a little sick of it, right? It started to feel a little performative, like 1,000 thread count. Like it kind of feels so out of touch, right? And what I'm seeing, and what research is showing us, and what I'm seeing anecdotally with the Gen Z students that I've been now engaged with for 5 years, is this quest for experience, for community-based tourism, for authenticity, and they can kind of see through the performative stuff. Like, it's so transparent. I mean, this may be a function of just kind of having grown up with a world of information literally at your thumb, So I think there's something to that. And we saw as Pauline said, we saw a world without travel during the pandemic, which was grim and gray and horrifying, right? And we're not going to go back to that, but we're going to be mindful of value. Not so much like, I can just splurge on first class, I'm not going to worry about it. It's like, maybe I'll just take coach and then splurge a little bit on experiential stuff. So maybe the balance is starting to shift. And I think that's, industry partners who are here might be wanting to think about that, where people are going to be investing, right? Their time and their precious time and their money. I do think there's another kind of factor that we haven't really, maybe over the past 20 years, we've been grappling with it more and more, is that when you think of luxury travels, for example, or even just travel in general, a lot of people still default to the, cisgender, white, opposite sex couple with a kid, and and it's just kind of that. It seems to be the majority. Maybe it's a plurality, not really a majority anymore. There's underserved segments, and there's this notion of inclusive welcome and inclusive tourism. And I think that when we start really focusing on the needs and concerns of those specific travelers. Like, what is it that African-American travelers may think about when they're traveling? What is it about solo women travelers, who's one of the biggest segments that we can possibly imagine, solo women travelers? Safety, right? But what does that really mean? Like, how do we, is our product considered safe? Like, there's research there, there's data, there's insights that we'd have to kind of think about in a smart way. But there are travels out there that haven't been leveraged. I mean, you know, it's kind of a crass word, but we really want to think about how if our marketing is an invitation, and then people take that invitation and they come into our home, you know, we invited them into our home, so to speak. Is the home accommodating them? And whether we're talking about diverse travelers, we're talking about the issues around accessibility, just making sure that our outsides match our insides. So what is it that they're going to get? So I think if we can think about these classes of travelers who have been underserved, we can probably weather, if not, weather this downturn, if not do better as we move forward.
Thanks, Ed. I appreciate you making it be broader and about a lot of different groups, but I do want to drill down specifically to LGBTQ plus, because like our session yesterday around Stonewall, there is erasure happening. And I've talked to destinations that have told me, yes, we're still doing the work. We've removed LGBTQ plus from anywhere you might find it on our website, but we are still doing the work. So
Sure you are.
I guess, Ed, starting with you commenting on that
Sure.
in particular, and then obviously Ernest, I want to hear from you as well. Can you appeal to LGBTQ plus travelers without using terminology that says that in general? Can you just say we welcome everybody, or do you actually need to be specific? Starting with Ed.
Sure, thank you for that. And, you know, I think the answer, it answers itself in a way, like everyone's welcome here. Well, you know, I don't see myself reflected. I'm in a wheelchair. I don't see myself reflected. I'm a lesbian, you know, in a mixed race, relationship with 2 kids. I don't see myself here. I don't see words. I don't see any indication that everyone is welcome truly includes me. So I feel like it's a non-starter. That said,
And
right?
can I push back quickly, because
Yes.
I don't want to just fall back on something. Can you do visual representation without verbal or the verbiage?
Yeah,
If all of your language, or if all your pictures are inclusive, but you never say LGBTQ plus, but there's, you know, a queer coded, if you want to call it, couple, like, is that enough?
How do you think like Marlboro and Camel cigarettes sold so many, like, and you know, they had all this coded advertisement of 2 men lighting each other's cigarette. But you know, the idea that we have to kind of devolve back into like coded, you know, it just feels silly, right? And I think you have to think about the audience and their reaction to this. Today's consumers, especially younger consumers, are super savvy. They do research when it's an involved purchase, like travel and tourism and hospitality. It's usually quite involved, higher spend kind of thing. They're just it's gonna feel like disconnected and dissonant. So if the answer is yes, you could absolutely do that. Like, and I want to just give credit to everyone who's right now, all these folks who are.
Sorry, Ed, just to clarify, you're saying you can do that, but probably
I think you can get away with it, but
what you're saying.
I think you can get away with it, but I think a lot of your travelers will be like, what the hell? There's something missing here. But, you know, yeah. But that said, everyone here is dancing backwards in heels, right? So, you know, because this stupid, strange administration decided that DE&I is bad, LGBTQ.
All right,
bad.
The Band-Aid's off. All right.
It's like, what the heck, right? So the imagine and you mentioned it, they rebranded the LGBTQ monument as LGB monument. Like, it's just so silly. Like, most adults with a brain think, oh my God, that's so silly and that's so dumb. But, you know, they got to do what they got to do because they're in this crazy situation. So we branders and marketers have to kind of acknowledge that and maybe we just remove some of the language. I think you can get away with, I've seen people who are head of diversity, equity, and inclusion to be chief people person. Like, you know, people are changing their titles but they're still doing the work. So I think with some tweaking, and you know, I'd have to know specifics to recommend a specific solution to that. But it just feels funny. But I want to give a shout out to all those destinations and brands that are continuing to do the work, continue to talk about DE&I or inclusion, because they're showing that they're actually succeeding. Target, which quickly did that erasure thing, has been hit by so many boycotts and so much so much anger from folks who used to feel like they belong there, that their revenue reports, our earnings reports are down, and the CEO acknowledges because of their ham-fisted, clumsy way of dealing with this DE&I issue.
Ed, I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to bring up Costco and Walmart, and Costco has embraced DEI, but they also have been hit with some boycotts because of that. So the travel industry could look at, I guess, Costco versus Target or Costco versus Walmart and see what's working. I mean,
That's
do
right.
you
That's
know,
great. Yeah.
has Costco had lost a lot of money? Do we know?
I don't. I would not be able to answer that without doing some serious research. Maybe I'll try to do it using Perplexity, my AI tool, while we're on the next question. But that's a very good question. So it's not something we could probably just like quickly answer right here. Right? Do this. Don't do this. But
Fortunately, I already had AI answer this for me.
oh, good.
So the one thing I will caution, and I think there's a caution and there's also another aspect to this, right? One thing that not to throw myself as being a voice in this too much, is that you can't compare every destination or tourism product and say they're exactly the same. And very similarly, you can't compare Costco and Target in the exact same way as well. Because Costco, with their membership model, with the demographics of people who go there, with, there's a variety of things that make it. And again, I'm not going to take full credit for this. It was a question I had that I had AI dig into. And basically, the answer was effectively you can't compare them in that way. But I will 100% agree, Pauline, that it's a question everybody should be asking themselves, which is, are you Costco? Are you Target? And if you're Target, do you want to be Target now? Who's, backtracking, and I don't even know that they are backtracking in all honesty. They're kind of just floundering. But do you want to be Target or do you want to be thoughtful on it? So I think there's certainly lessons to be learned there. I just would caution people to say, why can't Target be more like Costco? Isn't exactly the lesson I would take from it personally.
I
And
had,
I would caution relying on AI because they hallucinate a lot.
That as well.
She's
That's
not
fair
wrong.
too, Pauline.
Let me jump in real quick. And I had two. Anyway, I observed with hotels, hospitality brands, Hard Rock Hotel, head of diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's just changed her title. I don't know. And then the CEO and president of Marriott, who came out, and there's a video from April where he's talking to Forbes, and they talked about DEI and and he said, we've been around for over 100 years. We're going to still be around for another 100 years. Our members are our most valuable asset. We will do everything to make sure they feel included and they feel like they belong here. We will continue with our efforts. He got 40,000 emails in his inbox from people applauding that. Staff, people, Janet, the custodial staff in South Africa, and the different people in different brands all over the world. And then the Hard Rock, they did a survey with all their members, and they said, do you want us to continue with this DE&I efforts, even if we change the name slightly? 99%. She said it was like a ridiculous, like almost everyone said, yes, we really want, because DE&I just now has been splashed with mud right? It feels like woke. It feels like one of these awful words, but they're not awful words. They really mean important things. And when you think about the impact they have on actual team members, they love it. So how can we erase that?
Yeah, and Wilma said, yeah, that it was Marriott. It was Anthony Capuano, I think is his
Oh,
name.
thank you.
And
Yeah.
and I, what's interesting to me in terms of that anecdote and the one you just shared overall is it's not necessarily the terminology when it comes to DEI. And the Marriott, the statement did not say DEI. It was just more general. We believe in these things, and there was a values-driven thing. I want to let Ernest answer the question though, in terms of LGBTQ plus in particular. Is that a term that you think organizations can walk away from? Can you not mention the whole thing and then gay travelers, trans, whatever it might be, and still do this work? Can you walk that line? What is Ernest White II's take?
I mean, it's a big question, Ronnie. It's still early here on the West Coast, by the way. So, but nomenclature is what it is. It's changed throughout my lifetime, and certainly over the 20th into the 21st century. And I think that's part of the problem is you're trying to kind of lump so many different people and experiences and ways of being into like one group. So naturally, that was going to always be problematic. So I think you have to look at it from a nuanced basis, right? I'm not going to not go to a destination because they may not have they may no longer use the term LGBTQ, etc. One, I'm also of a generation where that didn't exist from the beginning. So even my own personal relationship to the term is fraught in many different ways. And so I think for me, it's about who's doing the work, on the ground. I can feel it. I can tell who's really sincere about the work they're doing and trying to make sure that I feel welcome, that other people, be they of color or be they in, many different states of physical ability, accessibility, et cetera, et cetera. You can tell when people are really intent on making sure folks feel welcome and engaged and are able to have the time that we want them to have versus those who are just focused on the catchphrases in order to appear like they care.
Mm,
I
well
I
said.
appreciate that, Ernest. And we haven't had this conversation necessarily, you and I, in many years, but I remember, when we did talk about your travels, how you were comfortable being somebody who was going to places where you weren't always seeing people who were of similar identities and trying to, bridge that. So I don't know if you want to speak to that and if that still is
Sure.
part of your perspective and approach.
Man, listen, I'm in the world and I'm in this body, so really can't care how people feel about my presence in a space. And trust and believe, there have been times when just my physical presence, let alone my hauteur, has ruffled feathers. And I think, listen, I come from phenomenal stock. And I think that's something that those of us who have lineage in certain areas can kind of lend our practice at not being the favorite person in the room and still shining anyway. My mother, born in 1938, she was 29 years old when Martin Luther King was shot, which was 9 years before I was born. There's turbulent times have always existed for some group or another. They just so happen to be, it just so happens to be turbulent times for everyone, quote unquote, right now. So they're paying attention. Whereas at, a previous times, did it affect our bottom line? No, it's sad, but we kind of don't care at the end of the day. So I appreciate now that there are conversations being had, and I appreciate my ability to lend some of just what I've experienced in the world to this conversation. But the point that you were kind of making was that we have to show up in these places. We can't be afraid. Yes, we have to kind of choose our level of safety. I'm 6'2". I'm a big dude. I recognize that I can go to spaces and not worry so much about my physical safety, whether or not they know that I'm gay or whatever. At the same time, everyone deserves the opportunity to go anywhere they want to go. And so you have to know that for yourself and you have to do it.
Thank you, Ernest. I think, there's two prior sessions I'll tie this to, which is Rachel Covello, who's in Lauderdale, was saying, and again, I'm not telling people to boycott, to not boycott, where to go, where not to go. But to your point about showing up, that is one thing that if you're not going there at all, there still are folks who are similar in identity, who are going to completely lose out if we're not having any touch points with them. And then the term that Danny Guerrero used in our first session today was the new majority, in terms of, to your point, Ernest, that there's been this minority majority term, which I'm not going to get into my thing with language, and I know, Ernest, you and I have had these conversations with a variety of things, but like minority majority is a pretty ridiculous term. I had not heard the term new majority before, and I think it's a reasonable and good one to be considering. And I think that is part of why people are waking up to this, because they can't ignore it anymore. All right, we are halfway through, so here's our big pivot, and I'll let Pauline hit this one first. Which current political policies concern you the most when it comes to the travel industry? We'll start there.
The other day, I contacted my one of my authors to offer her the next edition of her guidebook. She lives in Paris. She's a British woman, and she was stunned to have me call, even though I've called her every year for the last 10 years to offer her this book because she's a wonderful writer. It was her, what she saw in the news was a country in crisis. She did not think Americans would be traveling anymore. And, the Frommer Guide's 90% of our readership is American. So she was really surprised that I was calling. And I'm constantly getting questions from readers about our border crossings. People are now scared to go to airports. People are scared to go across the border into Canada or Mexico because there have been credible stories of racial profiling going on in these spaces, of people being grabbed unexpectedly, missing their flights, and certain people from abroad have come here and have ended up in ICE detention centers. I think in travel, we are radicals because what we do is hospitality. And what is more radical in a certain way than hospitality? It means we open up our hearts and our arms to everybody. We want people to come. We want people to experience the world. That's our job. And as I was saying at the beginning, we have to get the damn Trump administration to stop scaring people about borders and about travel. The other thing we have to do is we really have to push them on the FAA. I mean, it's true that the FAA has been underfunded for 40 years. So this is nothing new. It's being held together by bubble gum and Band-Aids. But the problem is the Trump administration fired several hundred FAA workers. And very soon thereafter, these were folks, they weren't air traffic controllers. They were folks who kept the machines running for the most part. And after that, machines started blacking out because they're very old. In my own personal conspiracy theory, I think this is because they're getting ready to give Elon Musk the task of redoing the system. So they want it to fail fairly publicly. This is me, total conspiracy theory, although I've discussed it with other people. And so what they've done with firing so many federal workers is so reckless, but especially in terms of air traffic and the FAA, people's lives are at stake. And so we in the travel industry have to start letting our representatives know that this is affecting our business. That if people don't travel, we're losing money. We can't pay you as much in taxes. I just heard they hired 16 more people at Newark, and they're getting new copper wires in. So bless them. Hopefully that helps. But this is a systemic process. And as I said at the beginning, I think we have to start get political. I mean, we're the happy industry. We're
Yeah.
hospitality. We're creating vacations and memories for people. But I think we in the travel industry have to start getting our hands dirty and start becoming more political actors, because the borders and the terrible situation with our airports and our airlines and our air traffic control, it's going to kill us.
Thank you, Pauline. The views expressed therein do not necessarily reflect that of Travel Unity, of our speakers, or of our attendees.
Sorry, I know I always
no,
get too far.
no. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
You want to go next?
they reflect my thoughts.
I said not necessarily. That was
No,
the
for me, I'm
phrasing.
just saying necessarily they do.
All right.
But thank you, Pauline's awesome. It's hard to kind of like add on to that because you captured it right away. I just think when you asked about policy, I'm thinking that gives them way too much credit. There's not like a policy, right? It's just slapdash, whatever kind of goes through someone, hit the head that day, that morning, and then it's something whispered in his ear in Mar-a-Lago, and things go, let's focus on, let's restrict visas for Chinese students. It feels vengeful. It feels like that's attacking Harvard and other international elite. Well, it's horrible, and that's not why we're here, is to gripe about that. But I think you're right. I think we have a voice. Being responsible for 1/10 of all jobs is a huge, huge asset in our favor. Those are distributed throughout all 50 states, all jurisdictions, all congressional districts, right? So, I think we're not getting enough credit, or our media, anyways, sort of mainstream corporate media is not really giving enough credit to the power of the people, which is, I think, one of the principal reasons Musk kind of like saw the door, and he kind of left. And a lot of it was people powered, showing up those Tesla takedowns and all that kind of stuff. So it works, whether it's just individual folks like ourselves going out and raising our hands and being with a sign or whatever, or industry, lobbying and talking to our representatives to make them understand that these quote policies, these changing, strange, unknown things that are happening, and people are just making people super scared and prohibiting travel. So we're seeing $12.9 billion impact in just a very short amount of time, negative impact on tourism. That's huge because we have that's the direct spend, but what about indirect and induced spend, how that money circulates around our economy, and it's very, very important. So I think, we have to go from selling, beautiful storytelling with these beautiful images and all this kind of stuff to a little bit more hard hitting and a little bit more directed, I think. I don't know what that looks like, but I think they listen to constituents, especially those red state folks who are also going to be dealing with, hits to their employment, hits to their economy. So I thought it's a little bit tangential, but my niece, Zoe, she's identifies as queer. She has a girlfriend. She and her parents, my sister, they were traveling to London, and my sister was really nervous because Zoe is very politically savvy. And anyway, she's also very much in favor of, she has this whole thing about Gaza, but she's raising money for someone who's incarcerated and all this kind of stuff. And my sister, Teresa, was scared of her coming back. So they got her a burner phone, and I kind of chuckled in my head, but I thought, she's just doing what she wants. She thinks it's important to keep her kids safe. So if you think about like my sister, we travel with some privilege, right? So she's a well-to-do cisgender white lady, right, with this daughter, and they were fine coming through the border. But when you start thinking about that multiplied by so many stories, that's quite scary. And it's not something I think it was not in our bingo card, from, years ago, like, oh, this would happen at this time, that we'd be scared to leave our country and come back into our country. So I'm not sure what that story adds to this discussion, but I think it's visceral, right?
Thanks, Ed. Ernest?
I think when kind of to continue the thread that Ed was on with regard to these stories, I think just personally, when I'm looking at like the New York Times, that's when my anxiety is at its highest, right? When I'm looking at the reports of the worst things that are indeed happening, but I'm not necessarily able in the moment to right size them vis-a-vis the number of interactions that don't go wrong. This is not to erase what's happening. This is to say, when I'm able to think, you know what, for every one instance of foolishness, there are 100 instances where that's not happening. I can lean a bit more into hope, into positivity, into the fact that like there is still much more light than there is darkness. And that's how I feel like I'm having to operate, in terms of how I engage with people. I personally am not connected to many different people or many people who are of a different political leaning than I am. But when I do find myself in the opportunity to converse with someone, I've had enough practice to kind of chill out on my own personal feelings and engage in conversation. And I think, it really is that kind of grassroots interaction that we have to have. So if we have people in our orbit in the industry that we know may have voted the way that Pauline is voted for Trump. Trying not to just don't want to say it. But if we know that there are people in our lives that have done that, and yet at the same time we see that there's some kind of opening to have the conversation where it may change how they engage with these issues, that they may then make a call to whatever representative, however small. The ocean is made up of individual drops. And I know that may not be some big answer to the questions that we all have, but it's the only way we have right now, is to make these little bits of connection.
And
I
I
want to,
think also
yep.
very quickly,
No, no, I was going to go back to you,
oh,
Pauline.
okay.
So you're
I
good.
think also we know things that our representatives won't know about the inner workings of the travel industry, and that's important for their states, for their communities. So I learned this from Ronnie. Apparently, most tour buses are manufactured in Canada. And so, with the tariffs hitting, that could have a rolling effect on any type of touring within the United States. I feel like this administration has had a very deductive way of thinking, or inductive way of thinking rather than deductive. They want to get to a certain place, so they've put a lot of things into place to try and get to their goals. But if we can introduce deductive reasoning into the discussion with our representatives, with people who have some political power, with our neighbors, with our customers, and let them know how if you do A, well, B is going to happen, and then C, and then D. These are not things that anybody outside of our industry would know. But because our industry is so important monetarily to the country, I think just spreading the awareness of, okay, if ICE is stationed at airports, that's going to kill travel to the airport that's happening potentially. People from that community may want to try and talk to the powers that be. I think there are ways that we can introduce deductive reasoning back into the discussion, just showing them things that they may not know, if that makes sense.
Pauline, I want to give you a chance to think both from the perspective of an individual who's here now or watching this video later, and their broader organizations. What would you like to see, or what would you ask or advocate or advise for an individual in the travel industry? And to whatever degree they can get their organizations, just like, what do you think individuals and organizations in the travel industry can and maybe should, in your estimation, be doing at this moment?
My husband is a professor at Columbia University, and as you may know, Columbia kind of bent the knee to the Trump administration and has lost and given up a lot of power with nothing in return. They've lost a lot of money. Just 2 weeks ago, they had to fire 180 researchers, people who are doing important work on cancer and other things. On the other side, you have Harvard, but not only Harvard, you have the Big Ten schools. The Big Ten schools formed a coalition to try and stand up to the demands of the Trump administration. We in the travel industry are not as directly being hit necessarily. We are because things are going wrong with air travel, and that always impacts us because people are scared of borders, as I discussed, and that impacts us. But there is strength in numbers. We need to be not like Columbia, but like the Big Ten. We need to be reaching out to other people in the industry and finding ways we can create coalitions so that I live in New York City. So most of my representatives are Democrats. But if I can find somebody in Alabama, if I can find somebody in Kentucky who has the same issues that I do within the travel industry, and we can talk to their representatives and see what this will do to that local economy and to the country if travel goes down. Then there's more power, and I can give support, and we could support each other. I think it wasn't till the pandemic when I realized I always thought of people as competitors, voters, Lonely Planet, etc. They're my colleagues. We're all colleagues. We're all in this together. When I was home alone in my own little apartment, I hated that feeling of isolation. And I've been trying to be more outgoing and creating more bonds between people. And I think that is what we need to do as individuals in the travel industry. We have to reach out to others and work together.
Thank you, Pauline. And I will say that over the course of past few years, people have asked for Travel Unity to step in some sort of an advocacy lane. It's something that we continue to explore and are talking to our association partners about, because when it comes down to it, our vantage point is one, everybody should feel safe and welcome when they're traveling. And then on the business side, that's good for business too. So being able to bridge those two things to say, hey, this work is also the business is something. So for anybody who is active or engaged with advocacy in or outside the travel industry, if it is something that you want to discuss further in terms of how Travel Unity might be doing more in that, we're doing a lot more exploration of that right now. Ed, following up from Pauline, what would Ed ask for in these times on this recording of May 29th, 2025? Would Ed like to see?
Well, I love this idea of reaching out to our elected officials, because I think that's how it works, right? Just the simple fact of, you could call the one switchboard number at Congress and get right to your congressperson. I think that's really important. Of course, being in a blue state, our hopefully our representation is aligned, but I think Paula's example or her ideas are really sound and really smart. I think I like what Ernest was saying too about right sizing, our discussion and focusing on kind of the bright sides of things and seeing what's really, really working. And, this idea of whether it's the Hard Rock or Marriott or some of the great destinations we're seeing, like the state of New York or the city of New York, New York City tourism, or some of our international destinations that are maybe even surprising, Thailand and Nepal, doing this interesting work within LGBTQ travel and tourism, and trying to just really get it right and be authentic, and paying attention to it, elevating those stories, traveling there if you have the means, sharing that information. I think we need bright lights, right? Where there's too much gloom, and the news, if it bleeds, it leads. Like the news is always going to be kind of negative, right? So we want to make sure we're sharing the positive stories as well.
Thank you, Ed. Ernest, to wrap up this part, and then we'll invite people to ask, speak, and all those sorts of things. You alluded to the fact that turbulent times is kind of the
The way of the
general
world.
foundation. It's just a matter of who is or isn't experiencing those. So I want to acknowledge that as a reality, but also, ask you the same question. If Ernest got to, have his way of what he'd like to see individuals and organizations in the industry doing, what would you like to see?
Well, again, I 100% agree with both Pauline and Ed in terms of just how we need to be moving through the world. And I would say, if I had to add something, just like we have to lean into magic. Maybe it's because I live in the Pacific Northwest. I'm kind of woo-woo ka but honestly, like we live in a world of transformation and beauty and adventure and joy, and even I bring Paris back again because like I went there on the heels of a heartbreak, and I'm like, crying on the Champ de Mars with like the sun kind of glistening off my tear-stained cheeks. Like that's the kind of life that I've lived, and that's what I'm kind of in this business to help other people live. So I think in that regard, that is why I keep leaning towards those positive stories. A couple of examples. One, I used to work for an airline a long time ago, throwing suitcases because me and customers just know. And so at one point, everyone kind of focuses on the one time their bag was lost. People really don't know about the thousands upon thousands of bags that actually get to their destination with you, or sometimes even earlier. And so it doesn't mean that those lost bags don't need to be dealt with. It just means, again, having perspective. The other thing is I'm doing a documentary, completing it, about my mother who taught swimming at the same YMCA for like 50 years in my hometown. And she grew up, both of my parents, in segregation. They couldn't go to the beaches in our hometown in Jacksonville, but there was a beach, a black beach, one county up. American beach. How patriotic. And the thing is, when they were driving that 45 minutes to go to that beach, they weren't thinking, oh, woe is us, we have to drive 45 minutes, as opposed to 10 minutes down the road. They were excited. They were exuberant. They were joyful. They were leaning into the opportunity and the possibility, the magic. And so I think, if nothing else, and that's not industry specific, that's about us as human beings in this experience. If we're not leaning into the magic of every day, we're asking for it to be a slog and for it to feel hard and all those other things. So that's my little 2 cents.
Right on.
All right, Pauline, I'll let you do the Pollyanna wrap up for yourself. Like, what gives you hope?
Oh, you want me to get positive?
If you want, if it's not the right time, then I'll
Give it a
No,
respect
shot.
that
no,
too. But
no.
I want to
I
give you
think
the chance at least.
Ernest is absolutely right. I mean, we are the first generation, or one of the, maybe the second or third generation, who's had the privilege to get out and see the world, who's had the privilege to be more themselves than past generations could be. And it's important not to forget that and to lean into the blessings too.
Right on.
Thank you, Pauline. Jazz, did you want to come on and speak, ask, or the like?
Hello. Hi, everyone. This was so beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm Jana or Jazz. Um, and I shared this a bit yesterday that my background is really in like social justice, communications, narrative strategy. I'm also a travel journalist, so I kind of fell into travel industry, but I wanted to just lift up a couple of things, and I do have a question. The idea of hospitality as radical just like blew my mind because I'm in these like liberation spaces and we talk about like radical in such these politicized contexts. And so to think of hospitality in that way just like lit me up because I feel like my role a lot of the times in travel spaces is to kind of like push a little bit more of like a little bit more political and social thinking because like our bodies are politicized. Like travel's political. It is joyful, it is magical, it is amazing, it's transformative. But because of our varying identities, there is a level of politicization of it, depending on where we go. So I also was late for today because I was in a messaging meeting listening to this messaging around like transgender narratives. And so this is, I love when my worlds get to merge. So one of the things that came up to kind of affirm this idea of hospitality is radical is that the message testing is basically about a lot of like these anti-trans narratives and like what kind of language can we use to combat a lot of this opposition messaging. And so one of the main things that like activates your base or activates kind of like the people that share our political ideas is this idea about kindness and like really thinking about kindness and respect. And so that like activates a base and it activates persuadables. And so I just feel like those lessons from that, even though it's a specific context, I think are really powerful in the ways that we're talking about hospitality being radical. Like I feel like those values, those shared values can work across all sorts of sectors, including travel. So I just wanted to lift that up because I'm like, yes, amazing. Um, Also, this concept of speaking more politically in the travel space. And I just feel like I was at the Women in Travel Summit 2 weeks ago. It's a blur, but anyway, earlier this month. And um, generally a creator conference. And one of the things I noticed though is that there was more of a desire to have these conversations, to be engaged in political conversations and like how do we use our platforms for not just like hey I look beautiful or or to talk about like hey top 10 tips when you're walking around Paris, but like having more of these questions. And I think because it's people are feeling more affected by it than we ever have. I mean, some of us. Um, and so I think that's like the silver lining of this time is that maybe this really is a time for us to organize as people in the travel industry. I've always felt kind of in the fringes because I apply this lens to travel, which is, you know, branded as like light and just, and leisure, which it is, So I just wanted to lift that up. And it's exciting to me to be in a space like this and to see that even the creators, which come from travel in a very different lens, are starting to want to be activated as well, and thinking about how can we help activate some of those folks. And there were some really excellent speakers in the space who were really planting those seeds. And then my question is, as a travel journalist, how do you see or don't see this landscape impacting like travel media, particularly corporate owned? And so what I mean by that is, again, a lot of the time, a lot of major travel outlets are not necessarily trying to cover some of these more like social, cultural, political pieces of the travel industry or what's happening in travel. And do you see that there is an opportunity for us to get them more involved and invested in these issues? And again, corporate media has bottom lines and investors and all of that stuff, but
Well, this is a bit of a sideways approach to that question, but Google recently demonstrated its new algorithm, and it's going to be getting rid of most links to websites. We are already seeing, just in the last 4 weeks, a 30% drop in traffic. And that's to every media site in the world, basically, because our material has been stolen by big tech. So I don't think you're going to have much luck trying to get more radical travel coverage, because right now travel journalism is fully involved with just staying alive. I know a lot of people, like, I know that Nomadic Matt had to fire his staff. He's no longer really in that space. He's trying to be in a different space. There are other creators, Luxury Travel Gal, a lot of the people who had major websites, they're gone because of these Google algorithm changes. And the rest of the world is hanging on. Sorry to give such a negative response, but I think it's the reality right now. And unfortunately, in the big, beautiful bill, there was a paragraph about no regulation of AI on a state or a federal level for the next 10 years. So if that passes the Senate, there goes all media.
Mm.
Except maybe big tech. Big tech will probably have to start hiring journalists because it has to feed the monster that is AI. Then they will be in control of all media, and that's really scary. So, sorry, that's a bit to the side, but
It's I think it's very much related. You know, the question was what's going to happen with them, and your answer is they're holding on for survival, so they're not going to be pushing the envelope. I think that to me that sounds
right.
like an answer.
The EU may be suing because of this, and I've joined a new, Frommer's has joined a new website called Gist, which is going to pay creators when they create a little blurbs based on our work. And we're hoping that eventually, when the EU sues and they have to change their model, this will become the new model. So we're hoping to hold on through that. And it's only going to be good, solid journalistic organizations that are part of that. Like at Frommer's, we don't run articles that we're paid to run. It's all journalism. So they're being smart about only bringing in the real journalists to Gist. So we'll see. We'll see.
Thank you, Jazz. Anybody else with any, we're at time. So any other questions or comments while we still are in this space together from our attendees? Feel free to pop on video or audio if you have anything else to say or ask.
I have something I would like to offer.
Yeah.
All right,
You know,
then let's
as you
wrap
were
it. Yeah.
as you were saying this, Pauline, I was like, that is crazy as hell. And at the same time, and again, call me Delulu. I just have the innate belief that somehow, some way, we will be able to pivot, that we are resilient, that we are bigger than all of the foolishness, simply because, again, over the arc of history, like Pauline said, like Ed has been saying, we're at places that we've never been before in the history of this go round of humanity. And
Yeah.
so to know that there have consistently been challenges, and it doesn't mean that we won't have to deal with some foolishness, and we may not, that we won't personally be affected by it. But if we're not knowing that some kind of way we will have whatever we need to make that pivot, to connect with the right person, and to make some kind of change positively, like that I have to live into, and that I want everybody to live into. We have to know that.
Yeah, and very, very quickly, our books are doing great. I think there's been such a flood of crap on the internet that people are going analog again. And so our books we're having a great year for the books, and they've been offsetting some of the losses, thank God. So I think you're right. There will be pivots, and they may be surprising, and they may be going back to core values or things like books. Who knows?
All right. I want to thank Pauline, Professor Ed Salvato, and Ernest White II, and all of you for participating today. This is the last of our sessions for this virtual summit. Again, the more we can know what you're looking for from us, the better we can try to give it to you. So please do reach out and let us know your thoughts, and there will be a survey. Thank you again to our sponsors, Visit Lauderdale, Miles Partnership, Visit Greater Palm Springs, and LA Tourism. Thank you to everybody who donated. And again, we have our newsletter. We have both individual and organizational membership, as well as a media network membership. So if you're not a member of Travel Unity Alliance, great. Now's the time to consider that. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And yeah, for those who are part of the Alliance, our next meeting is, as it always is, third Tuesday of the month, 1 p.m. Eastern. Otherwise, thanks so much. And to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.